me explain what it is and why it matters so much. The survival infrastructure is the set of systems a country builds before a crisis that allows it to absorb punishment during the crisis without collapsing. It is not military hardware. It is economic architecture. It is the financial plumbing that keeps a country alive when its enemies try to starve it. And China spent a decade building Iran's survival infrastructure specifically because China understood long before this war started that this exact crisis was coming. Here is what that infrastructure looks like in practice. First, the oil payment system. China has been buying Iranian oil in Chinese yuan, not dollars, since the early years of American sanctions. This bypasses the SWIFT financial network entirely. SWIFT is the system that connects global banks and allows international dollar payments. American sanctions work by cutting countries off from SWIFT. If you cannot receive dollars, you cannot pay for imports. You cannot pay your military. You cannot function as a modern economy. Iran should have been cut off from global commerce years ago. It was not cut off because China built a parallel system that does not use dollars. A system where yuan flows from Chinese refineries directly to Iranian accounts through second-tier Chinese banks that have no exposure to American financial enforcement. America designed sanctions to cut Iran off from the dollar system. China built a yuan system and handed it to Iran. Second, the dark fleet. China has been operating what analysts call the shadow fleet or dark fleet for years. These are tankers that physically disable their automatic identification systems, the GPS transponders that tell satellite tracking services where they are. They sail invisibly. They conduct ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, far from port, transferring Iranian crude onto vessels with different flags and different ownership structures before those vessels sail to Chinese refineries. China's customs records show zero imports from Iran since 2022. Yet China's recorded imports of Malaysian crude in 2025 reached 1.3 million barrels per day, more than double Malaysia's entire oil production. The oil was Iranian. The paperwork said Malaysian. And China's teapot refineries, independent refineries that process sanctioned crude, specifically because they are small enough to operate outside the major global financial system, absorbed every barrel without question. America built sanctions designed to cut Iran's oil revenue. China built a logistics infrastructure that made those sanctions meaningless. Third, the strategic reserve. China entered this war with approximately 1.2 billion barrels of crude oil in strategic storage, built over 2 years by purchasing Iranian and Russian sanctioned oil at heavily discounted prices. When the Strait of Hormuz closed and Brent crude spiked past $120 a barrel, China did not panic. Its markets stayed stable. Its refineries kept running. Its factories kept producing. The IEA chief stood in front of cameras and said Europe had 6 weeks of jet fuel left. China had 4 months of supply cover sitting in warehouses. America calculated that closing Hormuz would create economic pain that would force Iran to negotiate. China had already neutralized that calculus by stockpiling supply before the crisis began.